And in 3, 2, and 1. And hello there, good afternoon, and welcome to the Void Podcast with myself, Chris, and my fellow host, the bald-headed wonder that is Tom Moyes. And we are delighted today, sorry I could not resist that, and we're delighted today to be joined once again by Dr Phil Etherington. Hello Phil, and hello Tom. How are both of you fine gentlemen today?
Good, hi. Thanks for having me back on the podcast. I'm good, hoping I can do a good job again.
Perfect.
I think you always do a good job, so that's why you're back. That's what we pay you for. So
You're only as good as your last episode, though. Could get kicked off at any point.
Yeah. It always happens. Very sensitive. And I'm good as well too. So thank you, Chris. Launch it.
All right, lovely stuff. I will do, Tom. So today we're going to be discussing an absolute classic special, an absolute classic treat. I'm talking about Greece versus Rome. So this is something which people might be vaguely aware of, that in the ancient world, as the world changed from the power of ancient Greece, it then morphed into the dominance of Rome. But Phil, when we say Greece versus Rome, what do we actually mean? What happened between ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and what years are we roughly talking about in terms of these two states coming into conflict?
Yeah, so we're talking about the 3rd century BC into the 2nd century BC, basically, and it's something that happened with Rome becoming more and more powerful and expanding, and obviously there's the Adriatic Sea, and then you've got Greece to their east. And as they expanded, it was kind of inevitable that the two powers would come into conflict. And it's just around, how that happened. I think it's not something that's really talked about as much, which is unusual, because you always hear about Greece and Rome, classical ancient history. There's you hear about the two cultures always in the same sentence, but there's not that much kind of understanding of how the two kind of clashed and how that played out, which is kind of why I wanted to talk about that on this episode. But it is a bit of a challenge. I've set myself a bit of a challenge, because it's like incredibly fragmented and convoluted, but I hope I can give a bit of a coherent idea of what happened.
I am sure you can. And just before I've got one question before I hand you over to Tom for a couple of questions. But first of all, I should actually say to our audience, this is very much a beer drinking encouraged podcast, or alcoholic equivalent. So I can see Phil's got his gin and tonic. Tom is drinking a Maltese Classic. Is that Sisk?
It's Sisk, and it's low carbohydrated beer. So it's actually helping. It's part of your 5 a day. Which is why I have 5 usually, because I don't have much fruit, especially for breakfast.
Love it, etc. And I'm drinking a German classic called Lef, which my flatmate John has recommended. Very nice. Where is Lef from? Is Lef Belgium, German?
Might be Belgian.
Belgian, German. You say tomato, I say tomato. I'm only joking. But yeah, I think it's actually Belgium. Well, if it's Belgium, it's very nice. Congratulations. I like it, Belgium. But yeah, if we get firmly back on the topic, which is, we do have a habit of digressing on this podcast, but is it fair to say, Phil, based upon so that actually our title is slightly misleading, and it's not Greece versus Rome, but it's actually Greece and Greece versus Rome and Greece, and then later on it becomes Rome and Macedonia and Greece versus Greece, etc. Is it? In other words, it's an extremely confusing set of not just one conflict, but a series of conflicts.
Yeah, I think so. That's part of what's partly confusing about it, but also what makes it interesting is that it's taking place in what's called the Hellenistic world, which is what happened after Alexander the Great died. And it's kind of Rome coming into that world where the Macedonians have been and still are pretty powerful in Greece. And obviously, I think just to kind of backtrack a bit as well, it's talking about kind of Greece, the best way of thinking about Greece is like there was the, you know, before the classical era, you get like Greek city-states, and they like hate each other. They're always like fighting each other. There's different alliances and falling out, and it's more just around city-states. Then you get to the classical era, and you have this amazing story that in the 5th century of Persian Empire invading Greece, and that kind of unites a lot of the city-states kind of for the first time, and you have this kind of incredible story of these vast forces trying to take on much smaller forces, and the Greeks being triumphant, and they're free men fighting people who aren't free. So that's kind of the 5th century, gives you this more of an idea of a united Greece. But then further down the line, then you get the Macedonians taking over and that whole empire, and there's this constant kind of tension from that point of the Greek city-states who still kind of hate each other a lot of the time, but then they hate the Macedonians more a lot of the time. But sometimes it makes sense for them to make alliances with the Macedonians against the other Greek states that they hate more than the Macedonians. And then there's the kind of there's the Persian Empire that they hate more than anyone else. There's this kind of, it's all the constant kind of tension of like who people dislike more, and the Romans come into the scene, and again that's kind of, you know, some Greek city-states think, well, they're better than the Macedonians, we hate the Macedonians, and some Greek city-states think, no, actually, you know, Macedon are kind of Greek, we'd rather go with them. And yeah, so it's that kind of makes it more complex really to understand. It's not just kind of Greece as we think of it today, it's a more complex political picture really.
And on that, I think it's interesting because like Macedonia used to be considered as barbarian by the Greeks, at least until Alexander. After Alexander, it's a bit more debatable, and I think you're right. They had quite a lot of conflicts with Macedonia, or like some urge to like think that they were not really Greek. Do you think that was overcome by the 3rd century BC, or was it more tribal, or was it more cultural by that time?
I think it's like it's an ongoing discussion that's never totally resolved. So Philip II of Macedon comes in, and he builds this incredible army, and he takes over Greece, and then his son is Alexander the Great, who then creates this massive empire. And that kind of dynasty is trying really hard to be more Greek. And this is the 4th century BC. They're trying, you know, to dress in the right way, to try and, you know, take on the right culture. There's this story of Aristotle teaches Alexander because they're trying to be more Greek, so they take this famous Greek philosopher from Athens to Macedon to educate Alexander. So they're trying really hard to try and be seen as more Greek. But then at the same time, there are all, you know, throughout the history, there's always people who say no, they are barbarians. There's this thing about them drinking their wine neat that comes up again and again. So most Greeks would have wine mixed with water, but Macedonians traditionally just drink wine straight, which was I believe it is quite a bit stronger than the wine that we have today. So it'd be quite a fortified tasting drink, I think.
They're like port.
Yeah.
Okay.
Obviously getting really drunk and just acting terribly. So it's like a constant tension, and you almost get like, if a city-state, if they have like politicians and rhetoricians who are pro-Macedonian, they'll play up, you know, how Greek they are. If you get a city-state where they're anti-Macedonian, the rhetoricians, the politicians will say they're barbarians, they're not Greek, let's not support them. So it's always shifting, depends on what's advantageous politically.
Okay. Fair play. And so would you say, because your speciality is mostly on I mean, you've talked about Alexander on the podcast before, but do you think the Diadochi Wars would have had an influence on how divided Greece become after?
Yeah,
they came after, or was it more just the natural way they were before, and Macedon having a sort of like umbrella over this didn't really matter?
yeah, I think that's a massive part of what came after Alexander is so he dies, and there's this kind of myth, or I don't know if you don't know whether it's true or not, but on his deathbed he says that the strongest person should take over. So you've got all his kind of generals who are like, they're like mini Alexanders almost. They've all been through these incredible adventures. They've been fighting for like at least 10 years, taking over all these countries. They're super like battle hardened and great tacticians and everything. And they all instantly decide that they want to be in charge. So they all take different parts of the empire. So you've got Ptolemy, one of the generals, takes over Egypt and like Cyprus and a little bit of Asia Minor. You get Seleucus, who takes over all of the kind of eastern side of the empire, so modern day Iraq, Iran, Syria. That all is his area. And then you've got Antigonus takes over Greece and Macedon. And then you've got a bit more in Asia Minor taken over by Lysimachus. So these kind of four generals just split the whole empire four ways, and that's the world that the Romans come into basically, and it's it's quite complicated in terms of who's in charge, who's supporting who, and who wants to take over the different areas. So yeah, that's definitely a key part of it. And I think just one point to make as well is that that's kind of something that people are probably less familiar with in terms of history. A lot of people know about Alexander the Great, a lot of people know about Rome, but the bit in between those things is the Hellenistic Empire or Hellenistic era with these different Greek states. And that's why we end up with things like Cleopatra. She's got a Greek name, Cleopatra, it's a Greek name. She's from the Ptolemaic dynasty. She's actually a Greek, and she was like the last of the Greek dynasty in Egypt. And another fact that still always hears me say about why is the New Testament written in Greek? It's because it was for about 300 years it's under Greek rule by Alexander's generals and their dynasties. So I think that's a really important thing that easily gets kind of missed out, is this fragmentation.
Definitely. And just in terms of giving maybe our audience an idea of how long, first of all, the Hellenistic period lasts. So like how long are we talking, but in terms of that length, if you want, from the end of Alexander's death to then the conflict between Macedon and Rome. So that's the first question. And then the second question is that, again, and I love how the ancient world is all interlinked, but Greece, if you want more, rather Macedon, had quite a problem, right? Because also within that period there was the Second Punic War, of course, the great, if you want, war between Carthage with the great general of Hannibal and the Romans eventually, after some significant defeats in Italy, emerging victorious. But Macedon's problem was essentially that they were in combat with the veterans of that war, right? And so by that stage, due to that conflict, the Romans were an incredibly well-developed and diverse, and I've got other words written down such as ruthless, fanatical, innovation. I often find I'm a bit biased because I'm Greek, but the Romans always struck me as quite a ruthless lot. And then, of course, they went straight up against the Macedon. So if we maybe start with the first question, how long is it between the death of Alexander and the conflict between Macedon and Rome? And then just how big a problem was it for Macedon, the fact they were up against the veterans of the Second Punic War?
Yeah, so it's, good question. So the first thing is Alexander died in about, I think it's 323 BC, so 4th century. And it's about the conflict between kind of Macedonia and Macedonia and Rome becomes to head more like kind of 100 years later. So there's been kind of about 100 years of his generals ruling their different areas and fighting their own wars against each other, trying to expand their kingdoms into each other's kingdoms for about 100 years before that happens. But then also, so we're kind of talking more about Rome and Greece at war, but then think, you know, like the kingdoms like the Egyptian kingdom, the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, that carried on for another kind of 150 years after Rome had completely taken, you know, Greece had become just a province of the Roman Empire. So it's, you're talking about, you know, hundreds of years that these things take. But and then the next question was, Greek, how the Macedonians fared against the Romans.
That's, I guess, because, you know, I mean, to what extent by this stage were the Romans, if you want, is it the same Romans, therefore, who, if you want, fought in the Second Punic War, and obviously therefore quite an elite fighting force? I guess I'll leave Tom to get onto the nitty gritty, because in terms of how the different armies, if you want, compared, etc. But just how much of a problem was that for Macedonia? Because I can imagine by then, if you want, the capability of the Roman army was quite awesome.
Yeah, definitely. So I think first of all, just split it into kind of two different sections. So the first experience of Rome coming into conflict with Greek forces is in the Pyrrhic War, which is 280 to 275 BC, and I think we'll talk about that a bit later. So that's a bit different. It's got Pyrrhus of Epirus, where you get the idea of the Pyrrhic victory and stuff. That's all fighting in Italy itself. That's before the Punic Wars. That's before the Gallic Wars and things like that. So that's like the first the clash of them, and that happens in Italy. But I think we'll come back to that maybe later. And then there's a gap of like 50 or so years, and then you get 3 Macedonian wars, the Roman Seleucid War and the Achaean War, in the space of 70 years. So 214 BC to 146 BC. There's all these like conflicts, you know, it's 5 conflicts over about 70 years, and that's more where Rome is fighting. They're fighting mainly on the Greek mainland against. A lot of it is against kind of Macedonian forces or people who are from Macedonian dynasties, and exactly like you say, that the fact that the Romans during that kind of period in the this is like the 3rd century BC, they've had the First Punic War, the Gallic War, and then the Second Punic War. I think has made a big difference, because on the one hand they're particularly kind of worried about being invaded again. You know, Hannibal went over the Alps in the Second Punic War, invaded and had a lot of success, and they're becoming more kind of, you know, worried about threats nearby. And Greece is just over the Adriatic Sea, and there's all this threat there. So that kind of plays into the political aspect of them being more willing to kind of invade when they feel threatened. And I think another kind of thing is, particularly with this period, these kind of 3 Macedonian wars and the Roman Seleucid Achaean War, that second half of what I was saying, it's almost completely Roman victories. I think there's like one Greek victory out of all of those wars that happens, and that's sort of quite indecisive. So I think that's really quite telling, and that's kind of, those wars lead to the end of the phalanx, which is like a key way that the Greeks fought, and until that time was kind of like at the forefront of, you know, tactical fighting. And there's kind of, by the end of all these conflicts, there's been a final kind of, that's not going to work anymore, that the legion is far superior. And I can go into more detail, but I guess the main thing with a lot of the battles seem to be where you get the Macedonian phalanx, which is like a super phalanx, which had like these huge pikes which were called sarissas, which are 4 to 6 meters long, which is like much more formidable than the Greek phalanxes of the past. You get one of those kind of going forward, being extremely destructive, but then their flanks and their behind are really vulnerable, and then the Romans exploit that, and then that tends to lead to them to winning. So again and again you see that happening of this kind of stalemate, or the Macedonians seem to be winning, and then there's a flanking, and then they're destroyed. So yeah, I think Greece and Rome is really interesting to see, like the end of the use of phalanxes in warfare properly.
And on that, 'cause I love this subject on the phalanx versus Astartes. I don't know, mostly Astartes and yes. Because I'd say for the Gallic wars and other wars, one of the main advantages for the Romans was to throw their pila, disable the shield, or either wound any soldier, and then charge, and then like get in close range and stab. So to say. But like it seems like this would not, to me, it seems like this would not work that well against the phalanx. So the other aspects is the mobility aspect, and the adaptability in terrain, in difficult terrain. Or would you say maybe the pila had a bigger advantage as well in the Greek wars, or was it really the mobility, or a bit of both?
I think like you say, that using like kind of lightweight missile weapons against the phalanx, that wasn't particularly effective. Again, it's particularly the Macedonian phalanx, which had these huge, particularly long sarissas. They they could hold up. The ones further back could be held up, and that would block a lot of the missiles. They were heavily armored, and they had shields, so that kind of stopped it a lot. Where the phalanxes came undone was exactly that, like mobility. Like Roman cavalry was decent when they could get around the sides or behind. That was really effective. There's also other battles where the phalanx kind of goes forward and it's doing really well, and then it gets to like uneven ground and it starts splitting up, and then the legions can go in, and there's gaps in the phalanx, and they can exploit that with their swords, and then you get a flanking move as well, and then they're destroyed. So yeah, there's certain things where the phalanx seems like almost indestructible, and then other things where it's just no good at all.
Yeah. Seems to get in the side or the back, super vulnerable. They've basically got no defense, whereas Romans can turn around much faster and adapt. And I think, as a whole, actually, as an analogy, I think that's what brought the Romans to where they were, like their adaptability. Against Carthage, they had the problems with like not having the right ships, and then they built, I don't know what it was called, maybe built, and the thing that goes on the ship and made the ship battle.
Yeah, it's like a big gripping
sort
thing.
Of like crane thing that comes down and like grips to the ship, and then you can just like pass on. And all those things, and adapting, taking the best of where they failed and where they could do better, to incorporate it in their own tactics and their culture, was probably what the Romans did best and what made it last. Yeah, I think in terms of the Greek versus Roman, I'd be quite interested to. I don't know if that goes chronologically because of the Seleucid Empire, but like Pergamon was a very big ally of Rome. So, did that play at all in the conquering of Greece mainland itself?
Yeah. So one of the wars, I can't remember which one now. I think it might be the third, or the Roman Seleucid War. So within those wars, Pergamon, Rhodes, and Egypt all called on Rome to come and help them with the Macedonian king Philip V, who was attacking. So that would actually, I think that's the Second Macedonian War, and then Rome came to their aid. So it's Pergamon supported them, and helped. And I think at one point Pergamon forces were in mainland Greece in a subsequent war as well, and helping too. So that that helped a lot. So Pergamon was like a really powerful city on the west coast of Asia Minor. Yeah, so that alliance was helpful to the Romans, definitely.
Okay. Because I was always surprised, like, if I remember correctly, they left instead of passing it on to a new king, they left the territory to the Romans, and I was like, Jesus, that's some close alliance. You must have. It's some very high influence in the Roman. So I was wondering if that played a big role. But I heard there was the Romans employed many auxiliaries from even Macedonia and different Roman Greek states against the other Greeks as well in different Macedonian wars. So I bet there was, it's always harder to fight both your own but also new forces with different tactics at the same time. So I don't know how they went, but my guess, my best bet would be to like keep the phalanxes against each other and just push.
There are battles where the Romans have got Greek allies. So again, sort of like I was saying at the start, there's kind of these Greek states, and they kind of decide where their alliances are. Like for some of the Macedonian wars, there's the Aetolian League, which is an alliance across kind of the centre of Greece, and then the Achaean League, which is the South Peloponnese, the south of Greece, and they kind of are against each other, and they kind of almost, sometimes they're for the Romans and sometimes they're not, but they end up on opposite ends, or against the Macedonians alongside the Romans sometimes. And you see them using the phalanx. If they're facing a phalanx, they use the Greek city-states phalanx that are on their side to kind of go against that and hold it up while the rest of the battle happens, and you can try and then get into the flanks of the phalanx and finish the job.
Phil, just to make us, we're getting very nice and technical, which I love. But maybe just to, if you want, break it down for the audience, people who are a little bit unaware in terms of when these dates are. What are the, if you want, the major conflicts that we are talking about? What are the major flashpoints, etc.? And then also, secondly, if you could maybe kind of describe the makeup of the armies, etc. Obviously Greece, the phalanx, etc. But what was the makeup of the Roman army, etc. For any people who shock horror may not know.
Okay. I'll give a bit more of a. I'll go back and talk a little bit about the Pyrrhic War as well, to give it more of a chronological thing. So the first conflict where Rome comes in direct conflict with Greek forces is the Pyrrhic War, 280-275 BC. So King Pyrrhus from Epirus, which is the west coast of Greece, kind of opposite the boot of Italy. That's where Epirus was located. Some of the Greek colonies in the south of Italy, so places like Naples, Syracuse, and other places in Greece, were actually Greek colonies originally. So the Romans are expanding out all the different territories, taking over all the Italian tribes at the start of not the start of the Republic, but at that point in the Republic's history. And then Pyrrhus gets a call from Tarentum saying, "Can you come and help us against the Romans, because you're a fellow Greek?" So he goes. He's very ambitious, and he goes to join them, fights against the Romans. And so during that period, there's two battles in Italy itself, in south of Italy, the Battle of Heracleia, which is 280 BC, and that's really, really closely fought. But Pyrrhus is an excellent commander. He's got elephants and excellent cavalry. The elephants break the line. And although things were really closely tied, he's victorious. Then the next battle was the next year, 279 BC, the Battle of Asculum, again in South Italy. And I don't know, there's lots of different accounts of what happened in that, but it sounds like a kind of a similar thing where it was really, really closely matched. Then Pyrrhus used his elephants and cavalry really, really effectively to win the battle, basically. But because it was so closely matched, thousands of people were lost on both sides, and Pyrrhus is not in his home country. He can't easily get supplies and allies very easily, so that kind of weakened him a great deal, both of those battles. And that's where you get the idea of a Pyrrhic victory, where he was victorious, but he lost so many men that it was kind of overall led to his defeat. So those were the two big battles in that conflict. There's a few more. Pyrrhus does lose, and then he goes back to Greece and does some other campaigning and stuff. But that's kind of the first point where the Romans come across the Macedonian phalanx, and the first time they meet elephants as well, which they'll again face against Hannibal. And I think there's an element of kind of them fearing elephants, but then also desperately wanting them to be part of their army because they see how effective they can be. So 60 years goes by from that. That was just a kind of a separate little flashpoint based on cities in southern Italy who were Greek calling for help. Then you come into the Macedonian Wars. So what happens is around 220 BC, Rome defeats Carthage in the First Punic War, and then in 230 BC, there's a load of conflict around the northwest coast of Greece. So these tribes who aren't Greek, who are around kind of modern day Albania, called the Illyrians, they're always, causing trouble and invading the Greek states on the west coast and stuff. They become particularly strong at that point around 230 BC, and they kind of invade all round. Epirus is invaded and they take over. And then what they do is they start doing a lot of piracy in the Adriatic, which causes massive headache for Rome. Rome comes over, destroys the Illyrian tribes, makes them subjects of Rome, and then they leave. And that's kind of the background to the First Macedonian War. And then so in 218 BC, there's the Second Punic War as well. So all of this is, Rome is really, really heavily occupied with very serious wars at this time, so they don't really want to be dealing with stuff going on in Greece, but they put down these pirates anyway. So anyway, after the Illyrians have been put in their place, one of the kind of Greek generals who's very ambitious from that northwestern part of Greece, he originally was helping the Romans take down the tribes, and then he gets quite ambitious after they've left, and he goes to Philip V of Macedon and says, why don't we kick the Romans out properly and of Greece, and make sure that they don't. No, sorry, he says, let's just take Illyria for ourselves, and then the Illyrians ask for help. That's it, and the Romans come back to Greece to help them because they're now kind of a subject state of Rome. Right, so that's about 215 BC, and that kicks off things. There's all these kind of indecisive battles, and there's no one definite battle. There's lots of people chasing each other around Greece. Nothing's really happening decisively, and then there's a peace treaty. So the First Macedonian War in around 215 BC is very uneventful, really. Then not much happens. Romans are still dealing with Hannibal and trying to completely destroy Carthage and bring that all to an end. So they're really focusing on that. And then Philip V of Macedon is quite ambitious man. So he then starts going to attack in the east. He starts to attack Egypt. He's in Asia Minor. And around sort of 201 BC, he's in Asia Minor. And as Tom said, Pergamon are really annoyed by this. They want him to just go back to Macedon, leave him alone. So Pergamon, Rhodes, and Egypt all ask Rome to help. That kicks off the Second Macedonian War, and that's where Rome ends up in Greece. So the big battles in that war are 198 BC, a battle in Auos in Greece, in northwest Greece, where Titius Flamininus beats Philip there. He beats him in a pincer movement, exposing the sides of a phalanx. Then in one... Sinus Philae, exactly, yeah, 197 BC. There's another clash, and so yeah, or Canis Cephalae, that means dog's heads. Yeah. So Kaino as in canine is a similar root to where we get canine, and Cephalae is to do with heads. So yeah, I think it's to do with some hills in Thessaly that look like dogs' heads. So Cainocephalae. There's a battle there where Philip gets soundly beaten, and then yeah, the Romans take lots of they make quite strong terms for a peace. So they take his son hostage, which I think the Romans quite like doing, which makes me think of like Game of Thrones with Theon.
Yeah,
you know, take the son hostage so that you're.
There was no genital mutilation.
Not that I know of. No.
Unlike poor old Theon, who, like, a spoiler alert in terms of if you haven't seen Game of Thrones, yeah. There was no like Ramsay Bolton playing Ramsay.
There probably was something similar. I wouldn't be sure.
But he
Gallic Wars, I would assume, like some.
Oh god, yeah. I don't know. I seem to. This is sort of interesting. Yeah, I think the Romans did treat the Greeks generally quite well. I mean, they did, after some battles, they did sell a lot of them into slavery, and that's horrific. But there was an element of kind of respect for the royal families, I think, because so ever since the Romans had been kind of expanding into southern Italy, they're becoming more and more exposed to Greek culture, and through these wars as well, they're becoming more and more familiar with Greek culture, and that's why you see Roman gods becoming more and more like the Greek gods. They start seeing them as an equivalent of the Greek gods in those terms, which wasn't quite so specific before. There
was some admiration also of the Greek culture, because like even if they were sold into slaves, usually Greek slaves were like praised quite a lot, and ended up being in the family the educators of their kids and all that. So it was more, it was admiration. I think the Romans could have took Greece in spite of their culture. I've been like, we'll take over. But they didn't impose. It's one of the rare moments when it's like a conquest without putting down a culture, but a conquest with taking the culture back. Which I wouldn't know any other example in history, actually.
Yeah, I think there is a quote, something along the lines of like, the conquerors became the conquered because of the culture. Like, to the Romans, they barely lost the battle to Greek forces, at least in mainland Greece. But yeah, in the longer term, it was this idea that they were almost conquered by Greek culture. And Cato the Elder, who's quite a famous Roman kind of politician and writer, who hated this, and he wrote a lot and spoke a lot about how the Greek influence was like corrupting traditional Roman values, which were generally more austere and disciplined and maybe a bit more kind of ruthless, like you were saying, Chris. But and that Rome was becoming increasingly corrupted by just wanting to, more luxury and easy living and drinking and more kind of what they saw as Eastern influences.
Yeah, it's fascinating. That was actually one of my questions, which I had down for you, Phil, which is Rome wins the military engagement, but Greece wins the culture war. Which is a interesting way, I guess, of looking at it. But maybe, as the example, which you always tell me in terms of the Bible being written in Greek, is quite true in a way.
It's true, and so what my PhD studies were in an era called the Second Sophistic. So that's once Greece has been under the Roman Empire for a while. It's kind of like second century BC, and then into AD as well. And there's this kind of tension of the Greeks of being under the rule of the Romans, but then also being kind of respected by them, and sort of how do you Yeah, there seems to be a constant tension of kind of showing respect to the Romans in their writing, but then also the writings are a lot harking back to the classical Greece, where they had their freedom and their unity, and they were all kind of united against Persia, and everything was glorious, and they had the best, you know, writing and drama in the world. So it's this, yeah, is again that's kind of a tension of people who have been subjected, writing about times when they were free. So it's quite interesting.
Do you think the fact that they got subjected, because obviously, like, theatrical pieces, great philosophers kind of died down a lot by that time when they got conquered by Rome. Do you think that played a role? Is it because the best Greeks were brought back to Rome and then things adapted by Romans, or was it maybe just the fact of the falling power of Greece, or was it the Roman influence really sort of subjugating and not enabling anything coming out of Greece itself?
I think it was that, just coming into more and more contact with Greece as you know, through conflict and also trade, and as their kind of perspective just grew in Rome, and they started looking beyond Italy, and they discovered more and more of, you know, all this literature from the classical era that was so impressive, and all their kind of innovations in science and architecture and medicine and drama and literature, that then as Rome was becoming more affluent, and the kind of this the more well-off citizens were becoming more interested in education. As you said, you'd get like Greek slaves who were teachers, and it became a point where if you're an educated Roman, you had to know Greek pretty much fluently. That was kind of an expectation, and as the empire went on, they'd literally send kind of young Romans away to go and study in the Greek East or in Greece, and that was kind of part of your education as a well-off, well-to-do Roman noble. So yeah, I think it was, and then that fed into, you know, Roman literature really kind of mirroring a lot of the classical literature, like writers like Ovid, and like Virgil writing his own epic in the style of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Although it's not classical literature, but it's, you know, that's part of the Greek education. So yeah, it's definitely something where it was really, really influential on the Romans going forwards, their education.
Yeah, it's interesting comparing. I think this is something, Moisey, you could probably comment on as well, but it's compare the treatment of Carthage versus Greece. I mean, I suppose Carthage under Hannibal did try and essentially destroy Rome, but also feels like Rome didn't have a respect for Carthage, much more hatred. I mean, after the Second Punic War, you've got about 50 years gone, and even then you still have, I forget the name of the Roman senator who always ends his speech with the phrase, Carthage must fall. And there's a ruthlessness in terms of rooting out Carthage, finding any kind of cause for a conflict, and then stamping upon them and destroying them. And I think there's probably two reflections which you could take from that, which is one, a fear, but also a hatred of Carthage, and maybe a kind of lack of respect. Whereas if you compare that to Greece, yes, in a way you could say that they conquered them, although as you had outlined, Phil, it was much more complicated. But there's also an admiration. So I find that contrast between the treatment of, on the one hand, Greece and the Greek states versus Carthage quite a fascinating one, because it shows, if you want, the good side of Rome and the bad side of Rome. The good side of Rome to assimilate and take on much of a great culture which went on before, and I like the phrase which Tom used, the adaptation to it, which they then used later on the empire, but also the dreadful side of Rome in terms of Carthage and the way they went and ruthlessly went and basically, if you want, torched that former great civilization to the earth.
Yeah, I think an element of that is that Carthage, Hannibal invaded Italy,
Yeah.
and kind of invaded
with just cause.
with just cause. But they're kind of, I guess there's an element of that kind of panic of being invaded.
Yes.
That's there, and an element of that, and why they totally destroyed Carthage.
Yeah, and like you see with every war with Rome that like they're actually fairly fair as a conqueror is a bit of a strong word, but like a bit more fair with cities that just submit, whereas cities that resist they usually burn to the ground, and I think we could probably talk about Corinth in that context. But you see the same thing with I don't know the date exactly, but the first Gallic sacking of Rome, there was the fear of the Gallic people coming from up north that lasted well for 1,000 years nearly after that. So yeah, it's really the threat wasn't the same. I mean, there was a threat of power, I guess, from Greece, or the threat of Carthage as soon as Hannibal went into Rome, sorry, into Roman territory. And Cannae obviously killed 10th of the population. So if you're not traumatized after that, then there might be a problem. But like Rome always managed to come back out, and yeah, I think you're right, Chris. There's also this vengeful side of Romans, like we'll treat you okay if you submit, but if not, we're gonna go after you, and it's either you that dies or we die.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting just what a long shadow, if you want, that whole. I mean, I personally think, they should, if you want, at some point make a TV series about the Second Punic War. Maybe the Game of Thrones writers can redeem themselves a little bit.
Some other writers.
We're
not risking that a second time.
but it's interesting just what, if you want, a long shadow that I mean, you mentioned Cannae, Tom, but it's interesting just what a long shadow that creates. I mean, first of all, in terms of Hannibal's tactics at Cannae, with people who might not know, the center of the army, if you want, in a disciplined way, retreats, and then the wings of the army come and perfectly envelop I think it was twice the size of force which the Romans had at that point, but also moreover in terms of the phrase the Carthaginian peace. And actually, if you look at the Second World War, there were people in the American government administration, and also particularly under Stalin's, let's say, cabal, who very much wanted to enforce a Carthaginian peace upon Germany, and they were referring back to what happened with Carthage in terms of Germany. So it's interesting just what a long shadow that ancient history causes as well. But I think fundamentally, yes, you boys are right in terms of saying that the Roman hatred for Carthage was because Carthage became so close to destroying them.
And it's interesting. Hannibal. There's this kind of story about how Hannibal absolutely swore to his father that he would always be trying to destroy Rome as long as he lives. So when you've got stories like that going around, you can see why they'd be like, we need to totally wipe them off the planet. If that's their kind of mentality. And Hannibal kind of pops up in the Macedonian Wars as well, trying to help in some of the battles there. Help the Macedonians out, so they must have been thinking just go away. We've already beaten you.
Macedon during the Second Punic War, if I'm not mistaken, Macedon and Carthage were allies, right? And I think that probably caused also influence why Romans wanted to go abroad.
Yes.
Attack before being attacked. First.
That annoyed them definitely.
Yeah. You've got a potential enemy there, so. But maybe, so maybe if you want to say a few words about that, and maybe the different sorts of, I don't know. I'd be interested in the massacre of Corinth, and I'm not sure if the massacre happened in Thebes as well. think so, but I'm not sure. But there's not many much reminiscent of Thebes.
Thebes, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Thebes doesn't seem to feature a great deal in the Macedonian wars. There was a point where there was a kind of Greek and Persian wars, then Greek and Athens were fighting it out for a long time in the 5th century after that and weakened themselves. And then there was a point before Macedon came in where Thebes was the kind of the big city state, and they lost a number of battles to Macedon. Whether I don't actually, there might have been a just proper destruction of Thebes actually, and after that I'm a bit hazy on that. But yeah, they don't really feature in the Macedonian wars against Rome. So that might be because they were totally crippled.
Yeah, it might have died down before.
Yeah, but yeah, Corinth was completely destroyed. I believe that as in, so the final kind of part of the conflict was the Achaean War against the Romans, where the Achaean League, so in the Peloponnese, rose up against Roman rule in Greece, and they were kind of swiftly destroyed, and all their power was taken. I believe as part of that, Corinth was totally just obliterated, basically. And that's why you can visit ancient Corinth. It's just a load of ruins. It's not anything actually on that site anymore.
Well, it is the same thing with Carthage.
Yeah.
When the Romans went in and really wanted to destroy it, because. But why was Corinth in particular destroyed? I'm not too sure on that.
It's a good question. I guess they were probably powerful city and a main city of the Achaean League. So I think it was that the Romans saw that as like the leader, and quite an iconic thing to send a message.
Yeah, that makes sense. But sending a message,
Don't mess with us.
Roman tactics, and it works. Same thing with Mongols.
Who is the Greek scholar, Phil, who went and documented quite well the Second Punic War, and he documented that for the Greeks is a demonstration of the fact that they probably shouldn't mess with Rome, to use a layman's term, etc., which is very wise.
That Polybius, I mean, Polybius. So he was quite interesting character as well. So he was a Greek who I don't know if it was him or just his father, but his family were caught up in one of the Macedonian wars, and they were on the wrong side, and he was sent to Rome as a prisoner, and he actually, during his time there, he became like a big fan of Rome, and you have like at least one other story which is similar of a Greek noble person going to Rome and actually ending up being like really pro-Roman because they treated them so well. They were so interested in their culture and learning more about their literature and things like that, so Polybius ended up being staying in Rome and being a pro-Roman Greek there. And so he wrote his histories about the Punic Wars and about the Macedonian Wars, and like you say, he presents it in a pro-Roman way. He's writing in Greek, so he was expecting his kind of fellow Greeks to read that and to try to, I guess, rehabilitate Rome a little bit in Greek eyes, maybe for those of them who thought of Romans as just another like barbarian tribe, trying to kind of show them as more cultured and fair-minded and honourable and brave and incredible kind of conquerors. Yeah.
Okay. I think we should maybe not wrap up immediately, but I have a couple of questions on my side. We didn't talk that much about the Third Macedonian War.
No.
And I might be wrong, but in the Second Macedonian War, the Romans subjugated Macedon and most of quite a few of the Greek city-states, had their alliance with Pergamon, and then they got pissed off for some reason, I don't know which, but I remember they got pissed off, and then they just like flat out conquered Macedonia, the third war.
Yeah, there's it's almost different stages in it after different wars. This sort of first Macedonian War, there's this kind of peace treaty after not much happened. Second time, Philip V has to give up all his state, claims to the Greek states. He said his son gets sent off. He's a client king of Rome, etc. But he's still in power. Then Third Macedonian War kind of ends. Macedon completely loses its independence and is like really kind of weakened by the peace terms. And then by the Fourth Macedonian War, Macedon's just properly like a Roman province without any power at all, completely ruled by the Romans. And then the Achaean War happens after that, which is just a group of Greek city-states against Rome. And after that, all of Greece is just a province of Rome. So it's definitely a kind of an escalation of terms as it goes on, to the point where it's just the territory of the Roman Empire. No one, ruled by people who would be based there as like politicians and generals.
Just
Yeah. I guess I don't know.
Do you remember what they did to piss them off in the third one? I can't remember. Like they tried, but they're probably trying to conquer. Macedon probably tried to conquer something.
So I do know actually. So Philip V had a few sons. The son that went off to Rome, I think Demetrius, he comes back from Rome and he's saying the Romans are great. I think you should definitely stick with them like you have done. After the last conflict, you were on their side, and everyone in the court in Macedon is in disagreement about whether they should stay loyal to the Romans or fight against them again. Demetrius ends up being assassinated, which pisses the Romans off quite a lot. And his other brother Perseus is really anti-Roman. He's like, kick them out. We can take them on. They're not such a big deal. And then that kind of goes on for a while. And then eventually Perseus is kind of just causing all kinds, is trying to be seen as the protector of the Greeks and really extend his influence throughout Greece and the Greek world. And that's where Pergamon goes and asks Rome if they can help. And they try to convince the Romans quite successfully that if they don't take care of this threat, that Perseus wants to go and invade Rome and he's a real threat. And the Romans buy into that, and they invade Greece again and take it out.
They always look for threats.
So it's interesting how much, the kind of all the different treaties and people going for help and asking for alliances and bringing in, how these conflicts come about. It's you think, the Romans just expanded. They probably just wanted loads of territory. They just thought, we can defeat these people. But at least in these wars with the Greeks and Macedonians, it is a lot of just people asking for help, or that something's there's piracy that's causing a problem, so they go and sort that problem out. But then that causes another problem, and so it's much more complicated than you would kind of just assume, I guess.
Yeah, you can see, and again, just to conclude, why often people do compare Rome and the United States, to use a more modern context, because you often see other countries asking the United States for help, the United States interpreting, when a particular region needs help. But once you try and dig down into it, it becomes, as you use that word, for complex, really messy, complex, lots of grey, etc. So I think maybe just to round off, it goes, so just how complicated the world is now, but also just how complicated and messy the world was then.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's very similar. Yeah, because I think the Romans were looking. And sometimes they were, if they didn't want to invade, they wouldn't have helped. But sometimes they were looking for excuses.
Yeah, that's true as well.
It's said in the US.
Definitely.
I did have a last question, but then maybe could
go for it, Moisey. We can extend.
Launch a bit and the future, the more futuristic aspect. But would you say So obviously the Eastern Roman Empire lasted longer than the Western. Was it due to the fact of Greek influence, or just simply having more resources in the Eastern Roman Empire? Or
That's an interesting question.
it's
So
like
you
this-
mean, so there was a point. So there's a point where the Roman Empire splits, and the East becomes the Byzantium Empire, and the West is the Holy Roman Empire, I guess, which kind of falls apart. Is that
or
what you're?
even before, like the Vandals, the Huns, the Visigoths, they all decide, the Eastern Roman Empire is too powerful. Right? What at this stage made them so much more powerful? Was it something to do with the Greek culture that remained on, or was it just simply a resource?
That's a very good question. I think I would hazard a guess that it was based on that the Roman, the Greek, these kind of the Alexander's generals that had these chunks of empire had by that stage had them for like hundreds of years, and then when the Romans took over, they were taking over a pretty well established empire really in those different areas, and I think that probably was a big part of it. But I don't know. In the East, the Romans were often at war with like the Persians. There were kind of conflicts in the East, so I don't know. Maybe an element of it could also be that we don't learn as much about all the conflicts in the East because we're more kind of Western centric. But I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's. Sorry, Moisey. I was going to say that's a fair point. I think one of the most awe-inspiring things about maybe the Roman Empire is you could argue the Byzantine Empire was a continuation of the Roman Empire, and so therefore the length of that Roman influence in terms of what you term the Roman Empire goes beyond what we commonly would, or what in the West we would know it to be, because in the East, Byzantium regards itself as a continuation, and that lasted, I think, until what, the 14th century or so, until the sacking of Constantinople. Sorry, Tom, over to you.
1453, I remember that. But yeah, I think the point you Phil made was probably one of the things that I did not consider myself is that, yeah, like Rome encroached gradually on territories within Sicily, Carthage, etc. But like it wasn't united. There was always like Illyrian revolts, slavery in Sicily, etc. Whereas like on the eastern side, the Ptolemaic Egypt, like the Seleucid remnants, they all spoke Greek, spoke the same language. People in power had a Greek attitude, and yeah, so much more unified. And I think that is probably one of the reasons why most countries, empires, kingdoms, whatever, stay for a long time.
Yeah.
Can only hold on against rebellions and barbaric invasions until unified. Yeah, okay. Quite interesting.
Cool.
Seems like a good point to wrap up. So, Tom, do you want to do the concluding honours?
Sure. So it was a pleasure for myself to co-host with Chris and get Phil Etherington on this wonderful subject, and it was absolutely beautiful to have all of your great in-depth knowledge. And I would like to thank Chris and Phil for this, and your audience as well. And if you want to say a few words for both of you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me on. I hope, it's definitely a complex concept and a period of history, but hopefully it's given some useful information to people listening.
Good stuff. Thank you, guys.
All right, great. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.